Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm excited to be here today to talk about the really important topic of planning for end-of-year fundraising with our special guest, Suzanne McGarry from the Pacific Youth Foundation. Before we get started, let's just take a quick look at our housekeeping items, and then we'll dive right in. So first, we're going to go over a couple of notes that we review every time about the meeting being recorded and a few other items. We'll go through some introductions of our staff and of our speaker, and then Suzanne will lead a conversation and discussion about end-of-year fundraising best practices, what to do, when to get started with planning, and some opportunities that you might want to take advantage of later this year. And then, of course, as always, we'll have a question and answer session. But if you have questions along the way, you don't have to wait until Q&A. You can feel free to ask those questions directly in the chat. Now, we do ask that you keep yourself on mute while we're going through this part of the presentation, but you're welcome to come off when we get to the Q&A section. We are recording this meeting as always, and the link will be emailed to you within the next couple of days so that you can share this recording with your team or with any other colleagues who might want to learn a little bit more about some of those end-of-year fundraising best practices. Before we get started, I want to remind you that your best view is to click on View, then Speaker View, then side-by-side speaker view or gallery view, depending on what you prefer. So to get us started, if you could take just a minute to introduce yourself in the chat, type your name, your location, and your organization name. Welcome, Glenn. Thanks for joining us. If you're just coming in now, we've asked everyone to introduce themselves, so take a minute to type your name, location, and organization. Hi, Andy, joining us from the sunny UK. We have a participant from Lawyers of Hope in Rwanda. We have some staff here in Orlando, Florida, which is also sunny today, for now. And as you continue to join, please introduce yourself and continue to ask questions along the way. So I won't take up too much of our time this morning with opening remarks because I really want to turn this over to Suzanne. She has years of experience and expertise as a fundraiser and as someone who is really engaged in philanthropy and helping to fund impactful projects. So Suzanne is going to chat with you more about what is end-of-year fundraising and how do we do it here in the United States, and what type of best practices might you be able to take and adopt or tweak and change to work for you in your location, in your community. So for end-of-year fundraising here in the US, it might seem a little bit early to be thinking about fundraising this fall, but it will be here before we know it. Our holiday season in the US is coming up, and depending on where you're located, your season might look a little bit differently. But you want to be planning as far in advance as you can, because of course, as Suzanne will tell you, planning is everything. So without further ado, let's do a quick chat check-in. And I want to ask everyone, when does your fundraising year end? So some people might be on a calendar year from January to December. Others might be on a fiscal year from July to June or October to September. Just take a minute and share in the chat box when your fundraising year ends. It might be a little different for everybody. I see Glenn says that our fundraising season in the year never ends, which is true. Andy says the same thing. It's ongoing. We don't really have a year end. So that's a great point. So we do have, generally speaking, some fundraising goals for a calendar or a fiscal year, but your fundraising season really never ends, does it? So I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne, who's going to lead us through this conversation and talk much more in depth about end of year fundraising.
Thank you, Abby. Hi, everyone. It's morning where I am here in Los Angeles County in California here in the US. And I work with Pacific Youth Foundation. I'm their resource development consultant. So I work with grantees on fundraising projects, large and small. I will say the vast majority of the organizations I work with need help in individual and community fundraising. Not so much grants programs or government programs they may be involved with, but more about creating a broad base of unrestricted support of individuals to help them meet their goals and be nimble in the face of challenges. There's nothing more precious than unrestricted dollars, and year-end fundraising is a great way to capture them. Mostly, especially here in the US, nonprofits in the last 6 weeks of the year raise a third of their unrestricted dollars. It's like retail businesses and Christmas and holiday sales. Like a small business will make ideally what a quarter to a third of what they'll need for the year in just in 10% of the time. So now that we're about 6 months, 5 months out from that, is a great time to put a plan in place, engage key members of our staff and especially board to roll out an appeal to capture new donors, but more importantly, keep the ones you have and retain them. So that's a really important part of individual fundraising is donor retention. This most important gift a donor will ever give you, they say, is their second one, because that means that they're engaged. They didn't just, oh, you asked, I'm going to give you money to leave me alone, or because a friend asked and they're on the board and okay, I want to support them. But if they give a second time, that they're connected to the mission, they're inspired, they feel like it's a sound investment of their charitable dollars, and they trust you. So that's a key. So right now, let's say in mid-year of a calendar year, or leading up to a year-end holiday, it's important to look at your donor database. So I'm curious, and you can put this in the chat, how do you guys track your donors? Do you have a database like Salesforce or Razor's Edge, something that ties in with your bookkeeping abilities, so that you could track information, not just contact information, but maybe points of contact with an individual or family or a business? But now's the time to really look at what you have, clean it up in case you've got duplicates or bad email addresses or mailing addresses. It's time to look at what you have, how many, who do they know? Relationships are really important if you can also track that in your database. For instance, this is the neighbor of board member so-and-so, or this is a business that help help us get money to open a site. Some sort of information that should your staff turn over or as you grow, that information doesn't leave with that staff member. So having some sort of central place to keep that information is really important. Does anyone put in the chat what they use for tracking donor information? Just kind of curious.
Any responses? If anybody does want to add that in, if you use a spreadsheet, you might have just a list. Some people might use software, but if you want to share that, please go ahead.
I highly recommend getting things off a list, which is static, to something that could live in a cloud situation and always be updated and shareable. So you might want to explore, I know Salesforce has nonprofit options that are very affordable. And I think they've presented at maybe a World Federation Youth conferences in the past or things like that. So depending on how many names you have, I would encourage you to do that, because they usually tie into QuickBooks or different bookkeeping software so that you can run your reporting needs at the end of the year too, or to thank everyone. So let's say in June, you take a look at your list, be it on a database or in a spreadsheet, make sure it's up to date, and get a look at you have. And maybe especially as a spreadsheet, you could sort out of, did they give last year? Are they, or did they give 5 years ago, but haven't in a while? When was their last gift? What is their historic giving to you? Because that's how you want to target them going forward. Do I have any questions so far about databases or things before I move on to maybe now next steps? So as I mentioned earlier, retention is the name of the game. So you want to steward your donors. Before you ask them for another gift of support, it's good to check in with them. Have you sent out a annual report or email messages lately about new successes, challenges, opportunities your organization is facing or has achieved? Thank them for their past investment and share good news with them. And you don't have to hide the challenges either, but let them know that you value them and you're putting their dollars to good use. Invite their participation. So something with the call to action, like learn more, want to volunteer, but not a direct financial ask at this point, but do a check-in. It's almost like a sound check. Are they still connected? Share good news of your organization. And you could do that through an email, Instagram post, Facebook posts, if that's what you're doing. But I'd recommend, especially for your donors, is something personalized, like a direct email to them if it's all electronic, or even a physical letter if you have some sort of like annual report or flyer about your current state of things, if you will. So that's important to do now, at least 3 months out from your year-end appeal. So once you've done that communication, you've got a cleaned up database, you have a plan of like tangible, who are we going to ask? It's time to recruit your board members. Your board members should know who your donors are. They probably have direct relationships with many of them, if not all. And it's good to inspire some challenge and leadership on their part, where they can set up you know what, this year I want to personally raise $1,000 or whatever a dollar amount might be, or I want to be responsible for 5 or 10 donors that I just want to kind of be there. I'm just personally responsible for the communications and follow through. So I'd ask your board, you would maybe a subcommittee for the year-end campaign. If not all of them want to participate, that would be ideal. But if, let's say it's just 3 to 4 key members that really want to take this on, I would ask them to look over the list and then assign a board members, so that everyone has tied to a board member. Because as you do your appeals, obviously your executive director will be signing off on them, but it's also very nice to have another message included from a board member, from a volunteer, because they are not paid staff. They're an example of what you're asking the donor to do, of donating their time and talent to a cause very meaningful to your community. And so that inspires participation, to have someone like-minded in that regard. So you've got your board members assigned, and you might also want to consider segmenting your donor list, which means maybe what's considered a major gift for you. Some of those donors that have made really key investments, larger gift amounts, or consistent over time. And then if you have different levels where you can separate them out for perhaps a different approach. of the monthly donors, or they always give when we ask. It's small, but they're consistent. Or maybe there are some new donors that need maybe more information about your organization that they may not be familiar with because they're new to the community or just new to you and your support. Any questions? I just want to check in with the chat. So if there's anything, if I'm going too fast, or give me a question whenever. So now, thank you, Abby, for changing the slides. Measuring your success. I think what's also really important is that we set a realistic goal for your year-end campaign, because it's more positive to celebrate a success than to feel maybe downhearted because we didn't raise the 100 grand we really would love to get, but maybe 10,000 is more of an appropriate. So look at years past. What have you raised over a calendar year? You could give yourself a stretch goal, but especially since you're engaging board members and you want them to feel success, I think it's better to be very realistic, and you likely exceed it. But I think especially if this is your first time establishing a year-end campaign, to underestimate and over-deliver ideally than to set yourself up for something disappointing. So I would just, like I said, use years past as a gauge, and maybe add 10 to 20% if you've never done a specific effort for year end in the past. Happy to, I don't see any other chats about that. Because our goal is to have unrestricted support and a little cushion going forward the year ahead. So unrestricted giving, I'm sure with a lot of organizations I work with, they will look at let's say their calendar year or their fiscal year, and they'll have certain months that are really tight, that they don't have revenue coming in, but they have payroll, they have other expenses or insurance and things they need to pay. So the year-end bump helps them get through some of the leaner months. Another way, especially when we get to this, when you do like an online campaign, is you can set up recurring monthly donors. Maybe instead of giving $100 as a gift end of year, I might want to set up where I give you $10 every month, automatically done on my credit card. Having that kind of even out your revenue stream is something you might want to look at if you are looking to recruit new donors that are consistent over time. And then you'll need to make sure that you have the system in place via your website or your bookkeeper, however you're doing it, to be able to capture that gift, that recurring gift. So we could probably do next slide. That was just us. Well, I just wanted to make sure people set goals. We've got a chat check-in. I am curious if the participants have done this in the past, or is this their first year? Because the next thing I wanted to talk about was something that's really big here in the US, and I'm sure internationally, but is the Giving Tuesday. That's kickoff of the year-end campaign that happens. For us, it's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So let's say last week of November and leading up to it. And it's hand in hand with just the retail push that's out there for the day after Thanksgiving, often known as Black Friday, when retailers cut prices, trying to draw people into their shops or e-tail sites to buy gifts for year end. So people are in a spending mood, in a generous mood. And for us, that Thanksgiving, a secular holiday where people really are in a place of gratitude for all the blessings and abundance in their life, and how can they pay that forward in their community for people experiencing hardship or who may have less. So there, over the past few years, I know it's become almost universal for nonprofits in the US to have some sort of ask on Tuesday, the Tuesday following Thanksgiving. You don't have to call it Giving Tuesday, but just know there's the pump is primed, if you will. Your audience is in a mood, a giving mood. They're used to being asked by this. So it's not such an uphill battle. It's not a surprise of like, oh, you just want to, the challenge is to compete over the noise of the competition of people asking for support. I was going to highlight an organization I work with that you may know because I think they've participated with some World Federation stuff in the past, but it's called Social Emotional Wellness Initiative, SUI, and they've been around for about 4 years as an independent nonprofit and similar in size and budget, I think, to many of your organizations. And they have used a Giving Tuesday campaign with Facebook and Instagram in hand with a physical mailer that they put out about a week before, letting their current donors know that they will be having an online campaign. Thank you for your past support. Look forward to your future support. And they've been quite successful with realistic goals. So they've surpassed their goals, but they always set it at a kind of a realistic number. And we're able to engage board members in a peer-to-peer fundraising effort using their board members' Facebook friends or Instagram friends. You can also do a hashtag donation thing. The only thing when you use hashtag donors is you get less information from your donors. It's more of a one-time. So when you're looking to convert a first-time donor to that second-time donor, or perhaps even more of a friend of your organization, potential volunteer or board member, you're not going to have that personal information of where are they from, what else do they donate to, how do I know them? So that's the downside of doing strictly a social media campaign, but it can work very well with also an email campaign and maybe a physical mailer. So no, we haven't participated. Looking at some of the chat here. So not many. Okay. I'm wondering also, culturally in different countries, is there a similar push, even if it's called Giving Tuesday or some sort of give back at November, December in a secular way? I'm sure many faith communities already do tithing and things around the holidays. The last thing I want to make sure I hit with making this effort, that if you roll out, again, you're going to want a plan that's a big push, let's say on a Giving Tuesday, but then what will you do the last 2 weeks of the year, where you will certainly want to thank everyone who has participated, but have it be a reminder for those who have not yet of like, oh, it's not too late. So you don't want to use the same message to someone who's already given to you, so they feel like, I just gave you a gift, now you're asking me again. Have it be a thank you. And if you'd like to share this information with your community, there's still time to support. And then with a call to action. I can email some different examples to people. I know at the end my email address is on, but I can share some links with campaigns or Facebook, etc., for some language ideas. And also I know Sarah Young Shepherd from SUI, who I mentioned, would be happy to answer questions about how they do their process. But you really want to communicate with your donors at the end of your effort, let's say at the beginning of the year, with either a New Year message. Thank you so much. We were able, because of your generosity, we were able to raise this, which will enable us to do that. We want to thank you and encourage yourself if they want to come to your site, engage them with any volunteer opportunities or celebrations you have with your community, so they can see your mission in action. That will likely deepen their support over time, because it's those in relationships that are so important. So once they get to, if they physically know, have met you, the leadership of your organization or your board members, they're more likely to give again and give more over time. It inspires that trust. Those are the comments that I had to, like, the importance of doing this. But I know that people may have specific questions about how to do for their organization, depending on the size of their board, or are you remote, or is your board and your staff all in the same community physically to make this plan work? So I'm going to open it up to questions we have now. And feel free to turn on your cameras. I love seeing faces.
Suzanne, I have a question for you. It's Glenn.
Sure. Hi, Glenn.
You know, this is very much appreciated, as I mentioned to you earlier, and very helpful dealing with, a variety of different cultures. Some of this, plays differently in different parts of the world, but also, because of your role with being on the receiving end of proposals and requests for funding and so on. Can you share anything that are kind of red flags or pitfalls or things that you see from a funder's perspective that might be helpful for people to stay away from?
Well, you got to recognize past support. I think it's a red flag to receive an appeal as if they have never met you before or received gift from you. So that's why it's really important to know the relationship. You might be emailing someone at their personal email, but their business is given to you repeatedly. But if their email to you just sounds like they don't know who you are or why, that's upsetting. And then you feel like that you don't really know me, then you must not need me. And so that's why knowing that, keeping that database or that information really clear so that track your past communication and the relationship of the person to your organization. That's really important. Asking if you haven't really properly thanked the person for past giving or past, that's also a red flag. So that's why, especially if, let's say, you have someone in your organization that does the fundraising, but is not out in the community, you might not know these people, you've got to make sure your executive director or your board talk to your staff so that there's communication there, so that what's leaving your house, but your organization on your letterhead to the receiver. They assume that that's from everyone. So you want to make sure that your right hand knows what your left hand's doing.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just reading some of the text here. Oh, this is from Andy. Sometimes having people come to your organization is really hard to see it, but if you're doing things out in the community, I find that sometimes a nice bridge. So let's say you have young people that are doing a service project out in a community where it's maybe outside of the clubhouse or your organization, but they're going to be out or they're presenting to a local chamber or school or something else. That's anything that brings your mission out of where you are. That can really be appealing, I think, to have donors come visit and see your mission in action. Because I think sometimes coming to your organization for a donor, unless they're an institutional donor like a foundation or a government, they're used to doing these site visits, it's part of their due diligence. Individuals may feel like that's almost intrusive, or I don't quite want to know, I don't have a large gift, I don't need to be there. But if they're already going to be out somewhere in the town square, if you will, wherever that is, meet them where they are. Business members love to go to chamber events. They're already going to be there because they need to do that type of thing. Or that's an example that I would give. An end of year leading up to us, the more you could get your mission out in the world and have press to share about it. I mean, it gives a reason to make a new post. I don't mean that has to be press like newspaper press, but it's updates. Will you see us volunteering here? Or we sang at this community event? So you have new information to share and post, more reason to communicate with your donors. I will say this also about a red flag, and it depends on how, I don't want to say sophisticated your donor is, but they want to know that you're good stewards of the money. So how you report and thank them shows that you're tracking it well. That you know that I gave you $50 last year, or whatever it was. So keeping track of that information, to me, demonstrates that you keep good accounting, and that inspires giving. Other donors won't care as much about that, but showing that you are a careful steward of their investment inspires future giving. Do I have another question? On this holiday appeal here, I don't know if I touched on all these points. When do I need to start planning holiday appeals? Well, I think 6 months helps at least. And ideally, you're starting to map out for a 12-month development fundraising calendar so that you can align your communications and your plan month to month with your staff and your board. Your target audience of a holiday appeal are your individual donors. Not businesses so much. Businesses give because they also need to market. So they don't necessarily give at year end so much. That's usually if there's maybe an owner or proprietor of a business that wants to, if they have a great season, maybe wants to give back. But usually a business is going to want to advertise their plans to give back to the community as part of their marketing or their social responsibility, CSR efforts. So this is for your individual donors from your lowest to the highest. But especially lowest to middle, because your major donors, kind of need special attention all year round and an appeal, but you don't want to leave them out ever for communications from your organization. Okay.
I have a question, Suzanne. What would you say to organizations who have never really done much for end of year fundraising and are interested in getting started? I'm thinking about some smaller organizations and maybe some newer organizations who are still building relationships and meeting with donors. So what advice can you offer for people who are just kind of getting started and thinking about this for the first time?
Sure. Well, that's where using your relationships, I think, was really key. I would think a new organization probably does have a social media presence. And if you don't create one, the very low bar to do that. You don't need any money or investment. You have pictures of your mission and action, contact information for your leadership as appropriate. And that way, peer-to-peer fundraising is going to be your best friend. So using social media, especially if you don't have that many donors to have in a database, maybe you've it might be few, maybe you were started on some government gifting or one personal gift from your founder to get you started, or it's all volunteer based. So using the relationships of your board of directors or volunteers, if they would be willing to set up a challenge for themselves, be it a dollar amount goal or a number of people goal that they wanted to invite to get to know the organization, then I would absolutely focus on social media, and because it's just a great way to push it out to all of their contacts to invite them to support an organization near and dear to their heart. And then from that's how you start to capture donors, even if it's small first time, how then you could keep up with emails, inviting them after their support of like, would you like to learn more about us? Will you opt into our email newsletter? And then you may want to consider some sort of physical event at your end and bring those people to you if they're in your community, where they can see your mission in action. Maybe there's just a holiday, something to celebrate the end of the year, the new year, or an example of what you do, like Youth of the Year, an event that recognizes youth of excellence, so that they see the end goal of your mission. Is that helpful? And the Facebook giving, Facebook fundraising is very helpful with that, of tracking and all that information too about. Any other questions?
Sorry, I was just going to say we still have plenty of time left for questions, and I saw some people come off and turn their video on. So please feel free to ask questions.
Learn from, what's nice is you can do your research of what other organizations are doing in your community from their websites. They're already going to start to advertise now, or their Facebook, and you look back in their history. So you can just, from the comfort of your office, start to look to see of like, what are my peers doing? Or what are the big organizations doing? And what could I maybe do from their playbook on a limited budget or time? Start looking through the photos that you have, success stories you have from this past year. Capture that, because those are what you'll want to use for the content of your appeals going forward. Year-end appeals don't need a multi-page report. It's really an impactful picture, a personal story, it told in a paragraph or a quote from either a youth, a parent, a teacher, someone who's close to your mission and has seen its value. And then some sort of infographic I always find helpful about the source of your funds and the use of your funds. So organizations who, I mean, people who might be under the impression that you're fully government supported when you're not at all. Using that opportunity to communicate how you operate and inspires investment. I don't see any other questions. So knowing what this last chat about fundraising strategies, well, you've got to know one, your operating budget, and start from what you need a year to run, just from on the most basic level, and then what would be and how the sources of that fundraising comes, of just the basic level, and then how would have more, what could you do with a little bit more? Planning for your margin. So ideally you're already running as best you can, and maybe it's because it's all volunteer based, and so your operating budget may be very minimal, and how is that getting covered? But how could you plan to grow with more? And then you have to think though of who you have relationships with. So you might just want to start of who is our staff, who is our board member, just writing it all down on paper if you're starting from scratch. And then you, from there, when you see everyone's names, you could think of, well, where they work, where do they live, who do they know, do they have any ties to people of affluence and influence? These are the words you hear a lot when board members here in the US are looking to start a new campaign or invite new people to donate. They look for those two things. Affluence, which is, do they have money to spend beyond their basic needs? And then do they know people? Are they in a leadership position where their giving or support would inspire others, or policies in our direction, or help highlight maybe their influence is more newsworthiness, so it becomes a megaphone for your organization. These are things to consider, but you've got to map it out. And we all know more people than we realize, because it's like 6 degrees of separation. Got to map out who your supporters are, and then who all do they know. And then you might see that, oh, we have a bigger community than I realized to call upon. And board members are great to participate with that, of having a board meeting, just focusing on how can we map out, who do we know that could support us. Is that helpful? And that's something you could do every year. Start now if you have it now, but that could, because with every new supporter, the tree of relationships grows, right? Because then they have all their branches. So it's where, and every new board member that comes on or volunteer will have their community and relationships. That is my email there, Suzanne McGarry@gmail.com. If you would like any, if you have a more specific question, as you bring this information back to your staff or board or volunteers and want some help, or you check out Facebook fundraising and you have more questions, I'm happy to bring you any resources I can, or introduce you to someone at another organization that did something similar.
Does anyone else have any final questions for Suzanne before we wrap up today? We'll give everyone just a minute to think about that. So either drop your question in the chat or come off of mute and onto video to ask your question.
I just want to share, I'm so inspired by what you're doing for your communities and the youth that you serve. I am not someone that is a frontline program skill set. I just love bringing money to great ideas and to people that inspire leadership in their communities. So it's a joy to do what I do, because I get to meet people like you that are so committed to bright futures for young people. So I wanted to thank you for that and commend you for what you do. And I know it's not easy, and know that there are plenty of people like me out there who want to help bring you resources that are inspired by you. They just need to hear your story.
Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. We really appreciate you taking your time today to share your expertise and experiences and share some ideas about how we can get started with end of year fundraising. If anyone has additional questions for Suzanne, her email is on this slide, and we'll also include it in the follow-up information when we send out that email. So what's next with World Federation of Youth Clubs? Keep an eye out for an email from me within the next couple of days. You'll receive it if you're registered for this event. And it will have a link to a follow-up survey. We ask that you take just a minute to complete that and provide some feedback. And then of course, the recording will be available to share with your team. We encourage you to share that recording. It's posted to YouTube. If you don't already, you could use part of this meeting during a staff meeting and provide a little bit of training to your team that's doing fundraising. Just one way to use some of the resources available to you. Of course, our next webcast is coming up on July 28th, and that is Institutional Strengthening as a Key Strategy for Sustainable Social Impact. You're not going to want to miss that webcast. It features someone from Advisors for Social Impact, which is a consulting agency that performs program evaluation. And we're actually going to have a special guest from Club de Niños of Mexico with Daniela Melendez, who's actually worked with the presenter. So we encourage you to join us next month. And then if you have any questions at all, you can always reach WFYC at admin@wfyc.org. As always, there's a number of resources available to our member organizations. So check out our website and don't hesitate to reach out to me or the mission advancement team if you have any questions at all. Thank you again for joining us, and a big thank you to Suzanne and the Pacific Youth Foundation for sharing your time and talent with our team today. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.